Let's look at some creative ways to use open-ended questions. Open-ended questions can be strategically applied across various subjects and teaching methods. It really helps to enrich the learning experience. So, here are some practical ideas and examples on how you can really start using and incorporating open-ended questions into your teaching, along with some advice on how to effectively implement them. 1. Socratic seminars in literature and social studies. For example, in high school, a literature class, maybe you're studying To Kill a Mockingbird. You could use the Socratic seminar method where students start to engage in a group discussion. These would be based upon open-ended questions. You might ask a question like, how does Harper Lee use the character of Atticus Finch to really challenge societal norms? When using the Socratic method, be sure to prepare a lot of thought-provoking questions in advance. You want to guide the discussion, but remain flexible enough to allow for organic student-led inquiry. So encourage your students to cite evidence from the text to really support their interpretations, but also respectfully challenge each other's viewpoints. Second, project-based learning in science and math. For example, maybe during a project on environmental sustainability, you could ask your students, how can our community reduce its carbon footprint? Or maybe you could ask, what role can science and technology play in this effort? Always be sure to encourage your students to brainstorm on multiple solutions. Be sure that they conduct research and that they also apply scientific principles to propose some viable strategies. You want to use your open-ended questions to guide that inquiry and problem-solving process. 3. Inquiry-based learning in history. For example, you may want to look at, in history, World War I. You could pose a question like, what could have been done differently by world leaders to prevent the outbreak of the war? Always be sure to provide students with primary and secondary resources. You want them to be able to analyze different perspectives of the events that lead up to the war. Encourage them always to discuss and debate some potential alternatives and also the implications of those choices. 4. A debate in civics or even a government class. For example, in a civics class, you might want to ask, what are the ethical implications of government surveillance? Or you could ask, how should privacy rights be balanced with national security? Be sure to always structure your class into a formal debate. And the reason you want to do that is you want to have an equal amount of students that take each side. That way they can prepare their arguments. Be sure that you use open-ended questions to really prompt that deeper exploration of the ethical, legal, and even the social dimensions of your issues. You want to encourage your students to consider multiple perspectives and the potential consequences of different policies within those choices. 5. Problem solving in mathematics. For example, instead of simply solving an equation, you may want to ask, how can you approach this problem in different ways? Or, what method would you find most efficient? Be sure that you encourage your students to really explore various problem-solving strategies. Have them look at algebraic manipulation, graphical representation, or even how they can estimate or make a numerical approximation. Allow your students to discuss the pros and cons of each method, and then also give them the opportunity to explain their thinking and reasoning process. Reflective journals in language arts. Let's look at an example. Maybe you've read a novel. Then you can ask the students to reflect in their journals with questions like, how do challenges faced by protagonists relate to your own experiences? Or, what lessons can you draw from their journey? When you're using open-ended questions, you really need to prompt that personal reflection. Give the time for people to make those deeper connections with the text. Be sure that you encourage students to explore their thoughts and their emotions through their writing. You want to use these reflections as a springboard for class discussions and further writing assignments. 7. Role-playing in foreign language classes. In Spanish class, you might want to set up a role-playing scenario. Students could have an opportunity then to navigate a situation, like maybe ordering food in a restaurant. Then take a moment to ask them, how would you handle a misunderstanding with the waiter? Or how can you use your language skills to resolve it? You may even want to teach them and show them how they can use open-ended questions to talk around the topics. Using role playing can really help you to immerse your students in real life situations where they have to think on their feet. Your open ended questions then guide that role playing. They encourage the students to use their target language effectively and creatively. They get to be more confident. Then provide some feedback on both their language use and their problem solving skills. 8. Case studies in business or economics. Present a case study. You want to look at a company facing a financial crisis, for example, and ask them what strategies should the company use to consider and overcome its challenges? Or maybe you want to ask, what are the potential risks and rewards for each option? Encourage your students to analyze the case from multiple angles. You want them to consider both quantitative and qualitative data and factors. Use open ended questions to prompt your discussions on ethical implications of business decisions and the long term impact on stakeholders. 9. Creative writing and language arts. For example, in a creative writing class, you could ask, what if the story setting were completely different or a different environment? How would you change the plot, the characters, and the themes? When you use open ended questions to stimulate imagination, you then encourage them to experiment with different narrative possibilities. So allow your students to share their ideas, provide a constructive feedback to each other, and then foster a collaborative creative process. 10. Formative assessments across all subjects. For example, during a formative assessment for a science class, you could ask, what do you think are the most important concepts we covered so far? And how do these connect to real world applications? Use open ended questions in assessments to really gauge students' understanding of key concepts and their ability to apply knowledge. These questions will reveal students' thought process and areas where they might need further clarification. It can guide your instructional decisions. Guidelines for effectively using open questions. Try scaffolding your learning. So, especially with younger or less experienced students, provide some scaffolding to help them to tackle open ended questions. This might include offering sentence starters, breaking down complex questions into smaller parts, or modeling how to approach a question. Encourage peer collaboration. Use open ended questions as prompts for group work or peer to peer discussions. This allows students to learn from each other and develop their ideas collaboratively. Foster a growth mindset. Reinforce the idea that open ended questions don't have a single right answer. Encourage students to view these questions as opportunities to explore, take intellectual risks, and grow from the process of inquiry. Reflect and adapt. After implementing some open ended questions, take time to reflect on your own teaching and the effectiveness of those questions. Be sure to reword them as needed. Gather student feedback, and then also be willing to adapt your questions and teaching strategies to best meet the needs of your students. By thoughtfully integrating open ended questions into your teaching practice, you can create a more dynamic, engaging, and effective learning environment. These questions not only deepen students' understanding, but they also empower them to take ownership of their learning journey.